Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Room Update. We are on day number 215 of the war with the terrorists from Gaza, 214 with the war with the terrorists in Lebanon, 200 and something with the war with the terrorists in Yemen, the Houthis. We're not sure when the Iraqi militias joined in this attack on Israel, but that happened as well. And just last night, there were UAVs fired by the Iraqi militias towards Israel. The Syrians are also there playing along their role in this attack in Israel. Yesterday, rockets being fired into Israel and the IDF responding. On every front, really, there is constant fiction. Yesterday and in the last few days, IDF forces operating in Judea and Samaria, taking out ever-growing terrorist cells within the different areas. Today, we understood the bad news that one of the Border Patrol officers who was involved in those counter-terrorism attacks in Tulkarem actually succumbed, unfortunately, to his wounds and was killed. We're talking about a very, very, very hot period of time. And so we have the north. Yesterday, we saw 60 different rockets being fired and UAVs being fired by the Hezbollah terrorists towards Israel, basically along the entire northern border. We saw today direct hits of anti-tank missiles and rockets being fired at houses in Metula. Israel responding last night, 80 kilometers into Lebanon, already in the area of Baalbek, attacking Hezbollah assets and really that entire terrorist network. But that whole situation in the north is becoming ever more intolerable, ever greater attacks by the terrorists and a response which is growing. It would seem that we're not doing much there because we have 80,000 citizens who have been evacuated from their homes. But if you go into the pictures of what's going on in southern Lebanon at the moment, I wouldn't want to be living in southern Lebanon. This is the Hezbollah strongholds. This is where it had its forces. And the destruction there that isn't being seen so widely around the world is actually quite extensive. But today, I'm joined by my colleague, friend, Yoni Ben Menachem. Today, we're going to try and focus a little bit on Gaza, Rafah, the hostages. Today is really quite a watershed day in that IDF forces, after a very long time, after a very long wait, after really almost 2 months of sitting on the fence, operating, but really only to keep the peace or to keep the situation, maintain the situation in Gaza. Suddenly, yesterday morning, we see IDF forces moving into Rafah. Rafah and two of the two main areas of the southern part of the Gaza Strip are the areas into which Israel has not yet operated extensively. These are the areas in which Hamas's 4 last battalions are hiding out, and this is where the Hamas leadership is hiding out in the tunnels. This is where most, if not all, of the Israeli hostages who are still being held by the terrorists in Gaza, 132 in number, are most likely being held. This is where we need to get to. And so after much discussion of potential deals, options of deals, Hamas isn't agreeing, Israel isn't agreeing, everyone coming obviously to Israel, presenting Israel with ultimatums. This is what you must do in order to do what you have to do to fight the terrorists. Never once going to the terrorists and saying, well, this is what we demand of you. All this time we've seen growing levels of humanitarian aid flowing into the Gaza Strip from all directions, from Israel through the Kerem Shalom crossing, which just a few days ago was targeted from within a humanitarian area in Gaza, firing mortar shells and killing 4 Israeli soldiers. That was, and attacking that whole corridor, which was serving the Gazan people. From Egypt, we've seen also the continuation of that flow of humanitarian aid. We just saw this morning the announcement that the US and partners, at the time it was Qatar, but that Qatar doesn't seem to be mentioned so much, have fulfilled their mission and have finished working on the floating port outside Gaza, which is also meant to facilitate the entry of humanitarian aid. So and yesterday we saw again IDF troops moving in along that Philadelphia corridor. The Philadelphia corridor, for those of you unfamiliar with the term, is the strip that separates Egypt in the south from Gaza to the north. It's along that border with Gaza. It's that area under which, or over which, there is an official border post through which people can enter and exit, goods can enter and exit. But underneath that Philadelphia corridor, which really deciding the width of that corridor is a paramount discussion at the moment, underneath that corridor are the thousands of tunnels dug by the terrorists into Egypt, from Egypt into Gaza, through which the arms have been flowing, through which heavy machinery, the engineering equipment needed to dig tunnels as big that could take trucks, came in through those tunnels with Egypt. And all of those things together. Now, Israel yesterday morning seized the Rafah crossing, the official crossing point, and the IDF was even forthcoming with videos showing exactly what was going on. After the IDF forces killed the first 20 terrorists, they all retreated to their terror tunnels, and now we're seeing the continuation of those activities. With all of those things into the salad altogether, Yoni, give us a little bit of an understanding how all of these different pieces of the puzzle fit together. What are the hostage deals that were being discussed? Who agreed? Who didn't agree? The counterattacks, counter offers from Hamas. There's so much disinformation out there. So I would be very, very pleased if you could share some of your insights just to put these things into context.
Okay, so let's start with the updates about these negotiations in Cairo between the mediators, Qatar, Egypt, and the Americans, and the Israeli delegation. Apparently, there's a deadlock, but the Prime Minister ordered the delegation to stay in Cairo, even though there's a deadlock. And I think right now, or in 30 minutes, Prime Minister Netanyahu will meet in his office in Jerusalem with the head of the CIA, William Burns, who is coming here from Egypt and Qatar, trying to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to accept this new proposal of Hamas, with maybe some modifications, but apparently Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to say to him very clearly, no, we're not going on this deal with Hamas because this was a deception, and these terms that Hamas is trying to dictate to Israel are not acceptable for Israel. That means that this will be an Israeli defeat in the war. And also the terms of Hamas is that, we'll go into the details soon, that most of the hostages will remain in the hands of Hamas after they release 30 or 33, it's not clear yet, Israelis, live Israelis and bodies. This is the whole deception that we're trying to do. So
I think just for our audience, Yoni, I think it'll be helpful. I think the deal that Israel expressed agreement to said that there would be a hiatus in the fighting for 42 days. There would be, during that period, 3 hostages, live hostages, released every 3 days in return for the release of terrorists. And the response of Hamas was that the period of the fighting would be almost the same, but they would be able to release dead hostages and not only live hostages, and that they would also have the veto as to which terrorists exactly were released.
Yes, I will
correct?
go. I prepared here a paper comparing the original proposal of the Egyptians and the Hamas proposal, what they're trying to change and impose on Israel, which is a very bad deal. We'll go to it in a minute. But what I want to say is that if we go back, how this thing was born initially, because, we were all surprised. We saw all of a sudden there was an official announcement by a Hamas spokesperson in the name of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, saying that they agreed to a ceasefire. And nobody understood what they are talking about. The Israelis didn't know anything. The Americans even didn't know anything. And all of a sudden, they threw this thing in the air, surprising Israel, putting Israel in surprise, trying to isolate Israel and to show the world that Israel is refusing this proposal, that Israel was not even presented this paper that they are fabricated. So what happened is, and we have to look at the timing, Maurice, because this is all happened because of the Hamas attempt to prevent the Israeli military operation in Rafah, because they finally understood that Israel means business, and Israel is going to occupy Rafah area. So in order to delay this operation, they said that they agree for a truce, for a ceasefire, that Israel never discussed with the Egyptians or with the Qatar or the United States. This is the main reason. And apparently, from what I hear from Hamas sources, behind the scenes, what happened is that Yahya Sinwar, from his hiding place in the tunnels in Gaza, he planned this thing with his two supporters who are in Doha, with Ghazi Hamad and Khalil al-Hayya, and they are the ones on his order, on his mission, imposed this thing on Ismail Haniyeh, and they delivered this message, trying to sabotage the Israeli military operation in Rafah. So this is the background for what happened, and now, if you want to go into the details, I will give you the details of what was the original proposal and what they are now demanding Hamas. Well, according to the original paper, the ceasefire was supposed to last for 40 days. Now they demand 42 days. The number of hostages to be released according to the original proposal was 33 hostages alive. Now Hamas is saying no, 33 Israelis, some of them alive, some of them are dead.
They dictate who's alive and who's dead, or how many.
Yes, and we don't know. They refuse to give the names, by the way. Until now, they refuse to give the names to Israel. From the starting of the negotiations, they refuse to give the names.
So really, they could say, we're going to give you 30 dead bodies, and
right,
we not get one even live hostage back.
Exactly. And now, according to how the release will be conducted, is the original proposal talked about 3 hostages in the first day, and they are saying 3 hostages on the third day. Then it was agreed that 3 hostages will release every 3 days. Now they demand that 3 hostages released every week. And the keys for the release of the Palestinian terrorists, the Egyptian proposal talked about 40 terrorists for every Israeli soldier and 20 terrorists for every Israeli civilian. Now they demand 50 terrorists for every Israeli soldier and 30 terrorists for every civilian. The Egyptian proposal talked about a mutual veto, that Israel can veto the names of the terrorists, and they can also veto the names of those who will be released. Hamas, now they say, no, we are going to put the veto, only us. We are going to dictate to Israel what terrorists will be released. And you know yourself, Morris, you know some of these terrorists, these murderers or blood on their hands, who are how dangerous they are, those who are in the Israeli prison, and the Hamas demands their release. The withdrawal of the Israeli army, it was said in the original proposal it will be on the 7th day, and now the Hamas demanded withdrawal on the 3rd day. These are the differences, but there are major differences, and the danger of this deal is that we're not talking about only about.
Sorry, if I understand also the major difference is that Israel talked about a cease in the fighting, whereas Hamas talked about really an end to the fighting.
Exactly. The main obstacle from day one between in the negotiations between Israel and Hamas was the demand that Israel will put a stop to the war in Gaza and withdraw. And Israel refused because this is contradicting the goals of the war, the decision of the Israeli cabinet that we have to release all the hostages and topple the Hamas regime and destroy all the military infrastructure of Hamas. So now if we stop now, we will never reach these goals. This means that Israel lost the war. Not only that, after if we go for the deal of Hamas, we will get maybe 30 Israelis dead and alive, and then the majority of the hostages, they will stay in the hands of Hamas with no Israeli leverage to release them. So this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable.
It's unbelievable. It wasn't just a counter offer. It was to really change the entire framework of the ostensible agreement. But it was, we've agreed to our own demands, and now we're going to force them on Israel. And I think they expected Israel and the international community to support that. Is that something that you're hearing, that they believe that they can garner the international support for their one-sided agreement?
I tell you the truth, from what I hear from Hamas sources, they are very encouraged by the new position of President Biden. The fact that he's putting pressure on Israel, now they are very encouraged from the fact that the Americans stopped the weapon shipments to Israel. This is very encouraged for them. They're very encouraged from the fact that there was no humanitarian aid coming from Rafah crossing because Israel occupied it. And now, after the phone call between President Biden and PM Netanyahu, the president asked Netanyahu to reopen the passage. And indeed, this morning, Kerem Shalom, the Rafah crossing is open. And also Kerem Shalom is open, and the humanitarian aid is coming into the Gaza Strip. So Hamas doesn't have any shortage of food or fuel or anything. They got everything. They got full supply. And now they are trying to dictate to Israel what to do. The international pressure on Israel is growing. And they are counting on the international pressure, the American pressure, and also the Israeli division inside the Israeli society and inside the war cabinet. So they are trying to count on these divisions and the isolation of Israel in order to gain time and postpone the occupation of Rafah area. And I tell you, this is the key issue to put pressure on Hamas, because they exposed the weakness. Once they initiated this proposal to Israel, that indicates that they were under a lot of pressure from the possibility of Israel occupying all of Rafah, and they tried to delay that and to try to sabotage it. So this is why Israel has to be very determined to go on with this military operation, because, you know, Morris, I know Gaza Strip very well. I covered it for many years as a journalist, and you know, the one who holds the Rafah crossing and the Philadelphia corridor is the one who controls Gaza Strip. This is known. So this is the key. This is the key to put the pressure on Hamas, the military pressure. There's no other way to put pressure on them.
What you're saying, Yoni, really, it really is it's quite problematic, because it would seem that Hamas is translating the US policy into something which is positive, which is really an obstacle to Israel achieving its goals. That's the message. They are emboldened by the fact that the US has the US administration has stopped / delayed some weaponry coming to Israel. They see the benefit of attacking border crossings and then murdering more Israeli soldiers. And then the next day, President Biden is strong-arming Prime Minister Netanyahu into reopening those same crossing points that were just attacked. That would seem to be very counterproductive as policy goes. And all at the same time, the US trying to at least the administration trying to push Israel or prevent Israel from going into Rafah. And as you said, whoever controls the Rafah crossing, whoever controls the Philadelphia corridor, controls the Gaza Strip. So all of those put together would seem that there's a tremendous impediment from the US administration. Are they not seeing, are they not understanding exactly what that picture is?
Of course they understand. We'll get to it in a minute, but it's even more serious than what you say, because the Americans denies that completely. They said it's a lie, but Hamas claims that they got a guarantee from the administration that they should go for the deal now, according to the original Egyptian proposal, and the Americans gave them guarantee that after this first stage of the deal of releasing the hostages and the ceasefire, they will make sure that Israel will stop the war completely. This is what Hamas claims. The administration denies it completely, saying it's a lie, but it's very worrying. Who knows what is going on behind the scene? Now, as why is the President Biden changing his mind? Because at the beginning of the war, he was very supportive and helped Israel, and said that we have to destroy Hamas and so on. And now it seems that he is willing to put up with the Hamas staying in power in Gaza. That means that there will be in the future more attacks on Israel, more massacres. So I hear a lot of explanations, but the bottom line is that apparently it's the presidential elections. This is what is motivating President Biden to take this position, because he wants to win the elections, and he wants to get the votes of the Arab community. He wants to get the votes of the progressive supporters in the Democratic Party, and he is afraid to lose them in the day of the election. And so this is why he is changing his policy, and this is very bad for Israel.
When he spoke to us a few weeks ago, Professor Alan Dershowitz described it as Biden's obsession with the two-state solution, Michigan and Pennsylvania, not really caring about Israel and the Palestinians, just really focusing, as you suggested, simply on internal politics and internal politics only, and then ostensibly trying to push that on to what is going here, play to the not small Muslim community, which he sees to be or perceives to be completely supportive of the Palestinian terrorists. I don't think that that's actually true, and that seems to be influencing the whole thought pattern that's going on. And then into this also comes the whole discussions about Saudi Arabia and normalization, and whether Israel will be left behind. So they're claiming that the US position seems to be very convoluted, not clear, and it becomes very worrying when there's a question mark as to the reliability of Hamas's statement that they were given assurances that they would, if they accept the deal, this would bring an end to the war, and the American or the US administration denial.
Yeah,
that's a problem when terrorists could potentially be more reliable than the U.S. administration.
There are very strange things happening. For instance, the Americans stopped the shipment of very accurate bombs for the IDF. So what do they want the IDF to do? To bomb Hamas with non-precision weapons, with non-accurate bombs, that there will be more civilian casualties? This is really contradicting the American policy. And also, as for the two-state solution and the normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, if I was MBS, the Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, and I'm looking at what is happening, and I see that President Biden is neglecting its ally in the Middle East, Israel, and doesn't support it, and doesn't give it weapons, I would consider, as a Saudi, why should I go to a security deal with the Americans, and in the time of need, they will not come to help me. So why should I go and make this deal with the Americans? So what kind of message are they broadcasting to Saudi Arabia and all the Arab countries, the moderate Arab countries in this region?
I mean, that's been the problem with that policy all the way along, that it's sending a message that if the US, there can be criticism of Israel, and none of us would deny that we make mistakes like everyone else. But when it appears to Israel's enemies that the US has abandoned Israel to a great extent, that isn't necessarily only reflecting on us, as you said. It's reflecting on the entire Middle East. And so what security can you have in that whole discussion if Israel, which has been America's ally for 75 years, can suddenly be abandoned? So why would anyone else consider going into an agreement, into a defense agreement with that same US administration, if that can be the outcome?
Yeah, exactly. So these are very bad messages that the Biden administration is sending to the Arab countries and to Israel. And apparently the internal politics of the United States, the elections, the presidential election, this is affecting everything. And this is what is leading the President Biden. So until November, we should expect a lot of problems in the relationship between Israel and the American administration because of these elections that are coming. The more we get close to the elections, there will be more problems, I anticipate.
And this is something which I'm sure Israel's leadership will, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will certainly take into account that we have that level of instability there, that we do need to try and find our ways to move forward by ourselves, because the reliance on the US support is sometimes a little bit problematic, just because to put it on the table clearly, the US has the US interests at heart. And if they see that and perceive the US interest as being something which doesn't follow or doesn't go together with Israel's interests, then obviously that's the interest they'll choose. In this case, it would seem to be that divergence between the two sides isn't something which is supporting anything. If I was just looking, Yoni, we're in that really sensitive period of time in Israel's calendar, between Pesach on the one hand through to Yom Ha'atzmaut, to Independence Day, have Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have Israel's Memorial Day coming up next week as well, and suddenly I was looking at a few numbers. So Israel is on next week on Memorial Day. We're going to be marking the death of 24,000 people, about 20,000 Israeli servicemen, IDF soldiers, and about 4,000 civilians. Now, when we look and analyze the breakdown of those numbers, we see something unbelievable. Since 1993, since the ostensible peace agreements, many more Israelis have died than in the period running up to that. That's on the one hand. If you look on the Palestinian side, the numbers are even far greater. How many Palestinians died between 1948 and 1967? Almost. There were wars, there were operations carried out by IDF forces. You had a few, some people who were killed. 1967 through 1993, there were Palestinians killed for their terrorist activity, but again, not to the extent that we've seen happening since 1993. This has even intensified since Israel disengaged from the Gaza Strip in 2005. This idea of land for peace has proved to be, if you look at the numbers of casualties on both sides, not only on Israel's side, but also on the Palestinian side, has proved to be calamitous. It hasn't worked at all. It's been a complete disaster. And yet that still seems to be the guiding principle of the US administration. I would suggest maybe that what we need here is a little bit of a change in our opinion and of our point of view. If we care about the lives of Jews and we care about the lives of Palestinians, certainly we cannot go on the trajectory that we've been going on. It's not good for them and it's not good for us. A Palestinian Authority that allows terrorist organizations to operate freely, whether it be in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, is not good for the Palestinians. It's not good for us either. But if the US says, well, we have the best interests of the Palestinians at heart, and even the Saudis, if that's their opinion, the trajectory that we've been going on until now just simply doesn't serve that purpose.
Yes, this trajectory is leading to a collision. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to change unless there will be an Israeli victory in this war. We need a very clear victory in this war that we can rebuild our deterrence in the region, and especially towards Gaza. So this is why what is happening now with the negotiations on the ceasefire and the release of the hostages, Israel cannot give any concessions that will endanger its security, and we have to stand and push all the American pressures on us. And President Biden should understand that, and it cannot impose his will on the Israeli people just because he wants to win the elections. The Israeli people will not accept that, and I think also the Israeli leadership will not accept that. And if the Israeli leadership will accept that, then the public, the Israeli majority of Israelis will go out to the streets and reject any prisoner exchange deal, any release of the hostages, which is bad for the security of Israel, will not be accepted by the Israeli public.
And that's what we're seeing. And you would think that it would be something which is perfectly clear also to the US administration that a strong Israel is in the US interest. The idea of allowing the Middle East to be dictated by these really fanatical forces, genocidal forces, and then giving into them and trying to appease them isn't something which is going to bring long-term stability, isn't something which is going to bring the long-term prosperity for either side, and isn't something which is viable long-term. So you would think that the US administration would clearly understand that Israel cannot give up on its really critical security interests simply to cater to the momentary requirements of the US president to win an election.
Yes, I think we are very unlucky because we had this war during the presidential year, the year of the elections in the United States. Maybe the things would have been different if it was not the time of the elections, but we have to deal with it now. And I think that we should send a very clear message to President Biden, who is a great supporter of Israel, that we cannot accept this change of policy towards Israel, especially in these critical times. I'm sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu will say this in the meeting now with the head of the CIA, William Burns, that these things are not acceptable for Israel.
that these changes in both in when we start with the negotiations, and obviously it's important, I think, for it would seem for the Egyptians to show that they have added value coming into this discussion. From until now, the discussions between Israel and Hamas have been predominantly coordinated through Qatar, and suddenly in the last few weeks, when we saw there was no movement, suddenly Egypt has come into the picture. To what extent do you think Egypt is almost desperate to show that they can succeed where the Qataris didn't? How much influence do they have over Hamas?
They have influence on Hamas because they control the Rafah passage, and they actually can make Gaza Strip a big prison for the Palestinians in Gaza. They did that in 2000 until 2017. They would open the Rafah crossing only maybe twice a year or 3 times a year, and the people of Gaza could not go out of Gaza, travel abroad, going to study abroad, going to get medical treatment abroad, and this was a big problem for them. So they have leverage on Hamas. They know Hamas very well. The Egyptian intelligence has infiltrated the Hamas leadership. They have agents there. They know exactly what is going on. And also Qatar, as you know, Qatar is Hamas actually, and the leadership of Hamas is in Doha, in Qatar, and they have a lot of money. The leadership of Hamas has a lot of money in the Qatarian banks, which they use for business and for the budget of Hamas, but also personal business. So also Qatar has leverage on Hamas, but apparently this is not enough. And the one who is calling the shots is Yahya Sinwar. He's the guy that the head of the military wing and the political leader in Gaza, who is actually imposing this new reality, not only on Israel, the United States, the international community, but also on the Hamas leadership abroad. And they can't do anything about it because he has the military power and he has the support of the Gazan people, and he has the bargaining card, the most precious bargaining card, which is the Israeli hostages. So he has a lot of more power than the political leadership abroad.
So you know what, Yoni, that's possibly a fundamental subject which maybe our audience is a little bit less familiar with. You have this framework, this organization, a movement called Hamas. You have the leaders of Hamas, as it were, Ismail Haniyeh, sitting there in Doha with his partners, with Ramzi Hamed, with Khalil Abu Khaya, and on the one hand, and yet Yahya Sinwar is the one dictating all of the terms. Just explain to us for a little bit about the framework, how Hamas is made up, and what gives Sinwar this ability to be the one who's dictating really the subject and the decisions to the entire movement. There have been threats that Qatar would be asked to expel the Hamas leaders if no deal is reached. Certainly, they wouldn't want to leave Qatar. There, they live in their plush hotels. So how does that all fit in together?
It fits in together. You know, Hamas is actually has two arms, two wings. One is the political wings, and one is the military wing. Military wing is in Gaza and also in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria. But since the IDF is controlling the security and in Judea and Samaria, this is very difficult for them to operate in Judea and Samaria here, especially in the north of Samaria. And we see the success of the IDF in torpedo almost every terrorist attack that they are planning, because we have a lot of good intelligence, very accurate intelligence, because the Shin Bet is operating in these areas, and we can target these terrorists and kill them. As for Gaza, since the 2017, when Yahya Sinwar was elected to be the leader of Hamas, he's not only the political leader, he's also the military leader, the head of the military wing of Hamas in Gaza. And he, together with Mohammed Def, who is the supreme commander of the Izzeddin al-Qassam in Gaza, they built an army. And they built from 2017 all these tunnels that we see, and they succeeded in smuggling weapons from Iran that came through Egyptian territory, through the Philadelphia corridor tunnels into Gaza Strip. So all this weaponry that we see now in Gaza, this is Iranian made, and they coordinated these activities with the Revolutionary Guards, with the Qasem Soleimani, who was then killed by the Americans, and now they are coordinating with Hossein Salami, the commander of the Revolutionary Guards, and with Ismail Kahani, General Ismail Kahani, who replaced Qasem Soleimani as the head of the Quds force, that is working, that actually built these fronts surrounding Israel, full with missiles and drones. Hezbollah, the Houthis, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, in Syria. This is all Iran coordinated with the affiliates, with the militias. And in Gaza, they are coordinating with Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
It would seem that the coordination that has been conducted between, on the one side, the Sunni Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood is Sunni, and the Shiites on the other side, is something which is really quite revolutionary. In Islam, the Sunnis and the Shiites have been fighting for 1400 years, and it appears literally killing each other. More Sunnis die from any other terrorism than Shia terrorism than anything else. And so here it would seem to be that in pursuit of what they seem to see as their common enemy, Israel is helping even bridge the gap between these two really fundamental enemies.
Yes, the Iranians are very smart. Until April 13th, they did not come out to fight directly against Israel. It's only after the assassination of the Iranian general in Damascus, Hassan Mahdavi, that they claimed that Israel attacked the Iranian consulate, which is they claim is Iranian territory. So they came out directly and attacked Israel. But they usually use the proxies, and they will fight Israel until the last Palestinian. They don't want to sacrifice any Iranian. So what they're doing, they're actually using the Palestinians in order to to save casualties on their side, because they know that Israel is very strong and that Israel can retaliate in Iranian territory. So they don't want any problems with Israel. So they're working indirectly and using the Palestinians and the other proxies to attack Israel.
So I was talking on it to one of my Palestinian friends, and I asked him, please explain to me why it is that the Palestinians from Gaza haven't really gone through that fence with Egypt and really run to a safe haven in the Sinai. I said, Maurice, you have to understand, the Gazans, when they look at the Egyptians, they see what the Egyptians did. A week after the October 7 massacre, the Egyptians took all of their tanks in the Sinai, put them in front of the border, and said, any Gazans that come across are going to be killed. He said to me, you have to understand, Maurice, the Gazans would sooner believe and run into Israel for safety then they would run into Egypt because they know that the Egyptians would kill them. And here what you've just described really is exactly that. The Iranians are using the Palestinians, the Gazans, as cannon fodder, as a way to attack Israel via proxy. The US doesn't seem to care about the Gazans particularly either, doesn't seem to have their best interests in heart, because otherwise they wouldn't be defending this terrorist organization. The international community the same. Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign minister, supposedly, said today that he condemns Israel's actions in Rafah. None of these people actually care a damn, it would appear, about the Gazans. They all have their own interests, and the Gazans are just the unfortunate pawns in their game of attacking Israel. That would seem to be a very sad reality.
A very sad reality. And, there were anticipations, as you remember, since the war broke out 7 months ago, there were anticipations that at some stage the Gazan people will wake up and see what is happening and will go out and try to get rid of Hamas rule, try to get rid of Yahya Sinwar, and change their future. But apparently they're on another trajectory of a collision with Israel. Even though Yahya Sinwar brought a new disaster, a new catastrophe, a new Nakba on the people of Gaza, they are paying a very high price that they never paid from 1948 until today. And still, they are living in the same dream and still support Hamas. This is very sad situation, and we have to be aware of it, that still, in spite of what is happening, we are facing not only Hamas as a military wing, we are facing a lot of support for Hamas among the Gazan public, and this is very, very dangerous for Israel.
That seems to be a really not a pleasant situation to be in any way, shape, or form. Yoni, as I like to do, leave us with a positive message going forward for the next week.
I think that what Israel did, the fact that the IDF occupied the Gaza crossing, is a very good development. It might indicate that now we are on the right trajectory to put pressure on Hamas. I really hope that the Prime Minister and also the war cabinet members, not only Mr. Netanyahu, they understand the importance of this military pressure. And once, if it will happen in the coming days as a result of the deadlock in the discussions, negotiations in Cairo, if the IDF will continue west and occupy all of Philadelphia corridor, this is going to be a very positive sign that we are on the right trajectory to win over Hamas. I hope this will happen.
Yoni, let's hope so. Let's hope that we can finish off the fighting in Rafah as soon as possible and bring about the freeing of all of our hostages, and hopefully with release of as few terrorists as possible, because as you mentioned, some of them I know personally, and they are just genocidal maniacs. And no one would ever want to be their next door neighbor, and we don't want to be their next door neighbor. In the meantime, thank you for your insights and really helping us to unwrap everything, Yoni. We will be back here on Monday with really an incredible guest, with Iris Chaim, the mother of Yotam Chaim, one of the hostages who was kidnapped on October 7 and then unfortunately killed by IDF forces on December 15th. That will be on Monday, Israel's Memorial Day, and our discussion with Iris. In the meantime, thank you for joining us again. For those of you who would like to, you can go onto our website, jcpa.org, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. At the top on the right-hand side, there's also a donation button if you feel that you would like to become a partner in our work and help us continue on bringing the insights into what's going on both during the war and in the context of the wider Middle East. Until then, have a good weekend and we will be back with you again next week. Thank you very much. Yoni, goodbye.
Thank you.